Hi guys, so here we go. Today we're going to be looking at transitions in our language dive. So if we think back to our entrance ticket this morning, when you read those sentences without the transition words, it sounded very choppy. The sentences did not seem to connect with each other. So as writers, you need to have those transitional words to help your ideas flow more smoothly. You're showing that connection from one sentence to the next. You don't need a transition for every sentence, but you do need to have transition words within your paragraphs to help connect and clarify those relationships among the ideas. So let's look at an example sentence from the model essay. Let's first look at that word similarly. Now we see the word similar, which is a familiar word. Why do you think the author used similarly at the beginning of this sentence? What does it tell us about the next part? This is a transition word that's making a connection. So this word is telling me that the sentence that came before has a similar relationship to the sentence that the author is getting ready to write. So he's connecting the previous sentence to this new sentence, telling me they have a similar connection. Let's practice that. The sky is very blue. Similarly, blank is very blue. Look at your answer choices. Which one would make the most sense to go into that blank if we're showing that similar relationship? Let's look at the next part of the sentence. Langbanny recalls. So if you remember, hopefully you do, Langbanny is the author of One Day I Had to Run. So the model essay is comparing the novel to One Day I Had to Run. So when the writer says Langbanny, he's referring to the author of One Day I Had to Run. Langbanny recalls. What does it mean to recall? So if you remember, Langbanny was also a lost child of Sudan. So he is remembering his own past with being a refugee in Sudan. Let's look at this next part. What does Langbanny recall? So what does he remember when he thinks back to his refugee experience? He remembers the native people treating them very badly. So in the model essay, this piece of evidence is for the Kakuma refugee camp. The writer is giving us evidence about the refugees' experiences, specifically in the Kakuma refugee camp. So this piece of evidence is what Langbanny remembers from his treatment in the refugee camp. Of course, he uses quotation marks because it's quoting accurately from the text. If we took the word that out, it would not make a difference. You could still read this sentence without the word that, and it still would make sense. How is what Langbanny recalls similar to the previous sentence? So in the previous sentence, which we're not seeing here in this language dive, but in paragraph 2 of the model essay, the writer first talks about Salva's experiences in the Kakuma refugee camp, and then he's also providing this piece of evidence to show that similarity, how both Salva and Langbanny had those similar experiences of being mistreated in the refugee camps. Now let's look at this word because. Anytime you see the word because, you know you're going to get a reason for something. Why did you do it? Because you're going to get that reason. So what is the reason the native people treated them badly? They were treated badly by the native people because they didn't know them. They saw these refugees coming into their village and just assumed that they were, poor and not educated, so they treated them badly without knowing who they were. Now let's look at it as a whole. What if we replace similarly in this chunk with on the other hand? On the other hand, Langbaney recalls that the native people treated us badly because they didn't know us. If we used that transition, it would change the meaning because now it's telling me instead of it being a similarity between the two texts, if you used on the other hand, you're telling me as a reader that this is a difference, that Salva had a different experience than Langbaney. So it would change the meaning of the sentence. Also think about what's a different transition word that you could use here for similarly and still have the same meaning. So now I want you to look back at your own essay. Look at proof paragraph 2, because that's where you should have been explaining your similarities. And I want you to try to use the same sentence frame to write about the similarities that you saw. Now, instead of Langbaney, you're going to be using Grace, because Grace is the person who was featured in The Lost Girls of Sudan. So look back at your similarities paragraph. What is the similarity between Grace's experience and Salva's experience? Try to use a sentence like this to write about that similarity.